It's the end of the year again, and tensions in China over wage disputes are at a peak. This year, several regions have seen increasingly extreme methods from workers trying to get their unpaid wages. Recently, a social media user named Mu Yang posted on X about a labor dispute in Zhongxi Technology in Yongkang, Zhejiang Province. The company laid off several employees but refused to give them the compensation they were owed, leading to a conflict. In response to their protests, the company used various methods to try to force them to leave. Unwilling to back down, the employees set fire to a building inside the company on the night of December 19. On the same day, a factory near Dalian Bay in Dalian, Liaoning Province also experienced a labor dispute. The factory reportedly used violence to drive away workers demanding their wages. In retaliation, the workers set fire to the factory. Another X-user reported that on December 21st, a factory in Taicang, Jiangsu Province, caught fire, with thick black smoke rising to the sky. The post explained that this factory had a long history of labor disputes, and workers, feeling exploited, tried various ways to seek help but saw no improvement. With no other options left, they resorted to setting the factory on fire. In recent years, China's struggling economy has led to many companies delaying or withholding wages from employees. However, when workers demand their wages, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, often responds with punishments such as detention. Many people have shared their experiences online about being detained after trying to recover their wages. One person said their employer owed them over 300,000 yuan. After taking action, they managed to get their money back, only to be detained by the police for 15 days. Another person said they were owed tens of thousands of yuan. After successfully getting their wages, they were detained for 6 days. One user sarcastically asked how many days they would need to be detained to recover the 1.7 million yuan they were owed. In China, being able to recover unpaid wages, even if it means facing detention, is considered lucky. However, many workers never manage to get their wages back at all. Mu Yang commented that workers across the country are copying each other's methods to defend their rights. He speculated that this factory burning trend could spread widely across China. Here are some incidents of unexplained factory fires in different regions. On December 10th, a fire broke out at a paper factory in Chaozhou, Guangdong Province. On December 21st, a fire occurred at the Red Ant Shoe Factory in Wenzhou's Xianyan Industrial Zone. The cause of the fire is still unknown. On December 24th, a factory on Shangtang North Road in Xiamen caught fire. On December 26th, a social media user reported a fire at a factory in Taohejing, Shanghai, also with no known cause. On December 20th, during a meeting of the CCP State Council Employment Promotion and Labor Protection Leading Group, officials emphasized cracking down on wage arrears, particularly in government and state-owned enterprise projects. The focus was on addressing unpaid wages during the winter season. On December 23rd, China's Supreme People's Court held a press conference announcing a nationwide initiative to tackle wage arrears. Courts across the country were instructed to focus on sectors such as construction, with special attention on local government and state-owned projects. However, the CCP's year-end push to address unpaid wages is not truly about protecting workers' rights. The real goal is to maintain political stability and eliminate any potential threats to its power. Former human rights lawyer Cheng Jianggang, who now lives in the United States, remarked, "The officials under Xi Jinping's regime are simply putting on a show with these meetings, staging grand announcements of determination to overcome difficulties. Slogans like, 'with heart and compassion,' would sound absurd in a country with proper rule of law. If the legal system were sound, these problems would be resolved by law. In a normal legal society, such severe injustices would hardly exist." He continued, "When the CCP starts to heavily publicize an issue, it signals that they recognize the problem could threaten their grip on power. Ultimately, everything they do is aimed at preserving their authority and stabilizing their rule. The reality is that the CCP's emphasis on solving wage arrears is mere performance. In practice, they crack down harshly on lawyers representing migrant workers in wage disputes." According to BJ News, on December 20th, Gao Bingfang, a female lawyer from Tai'an, Shandong Province, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for representing 75 migrant workers in a wage dispute. The case stemmed from a construction project with multiple subcontractors. After the project was completed, Zhoudian Construction and Installation Company in Tai'an withheld a large portion of the project fees from the subcontractor, the second defendant. The subcontractor personally paid the workers' wages out of pocket and later hired Gao to represent the workers in suing the general contractor for unpaid wages. The subcontractor in the case was accused of using the excuse of unpaid wages for migrant workers to sue the construction company. Prosecutors claimed this constituted false litigation, implicating lawyer Gao Bingfang. During the trial, Gao maintained her innocence, arguing she had no prior knowledge of the situation. Her defense lawyer pointed to substantial evidence proving Gao was unaware that the subcontractor had paid the workers out of pocket. The lawyer argued that without criminal intent, Gao's actions did not meet the criteria for false litigation. Lawyer Wang Yu, a member of the 709 Human Rights Defense Group, called the verdict absurd, criticizing authorities for targeting lawyers and subcontractors who tried to help. She described it as trampling on the rights of vulnerable groups. Legal scholar Teng Biao, who now resides in the United States, said Gao's case highlights the severe regression of China's legal system. Teng argued that the CCP views rights lawyers as enemies of the state, with courts acting as enforcers, disregarding justice. Since 2019, the CCP State Council and its Employment Promotion and Labor Protection Working Group have held annual meetings at the end of each year, calling for the resolution of unpaid wages and project arrears, especially in state-owned enterprises and government projects. Despite this, wage arrears remain a persistent issue. As early as 2003, former Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao declared during an inspection in Yunyang County, Chongqing, that the money owed to farmers must be repaid. In subsequent years, the CCP introduced various measures to address unpaid wages for migrant workers, including the 2016 Opinion on Fully Addressing Wage Arrears for Migrant Workers and the 2020 Regulation on Guaranteeing Wage Payments for Migrant Workers. However, to this day, wage arrears remain unresolved. According to Voice of America, Kevin Slayton, head of Freedom House's China Dissident Monitor, reported that this year's wave of wage protests began as early as September and October. Typically, the peak season for such protests falls in the 2 months leading up to the Lunar New Year. A survey by the China Dissident Monitor recorded 937 incidents of protest between July and September, with 41% involving labor disputes. Protests linked to economic grievances increased by 27% compared to the same period in 2023. Overall, about 3/4 of the dissent incidents were related to economic dissatisfaction, including wage arrears and stalled housing projects. Slayton noted that the real estate crisis has left many construction workers unpaid. The industry had been struggling for years. Recently, major developers like Country Garden and Sunac have faced debt crises. Real estate accounts for 1/4 of China's economy. The crisis is spreading to other sectors. A worker from Chongqing, identified only as Mr. Wu for safety reasons, revealed that his auto parts factory employs hundreds of disabled workers. Every month, the company pockets most of the disability subsidy, giving workers only a few hundred yuan each. Mr. Wu said it's common for companies to skim off subsidies meant for disabled workers. Many of the workers are deaf, mute, or have physical disabilities. They're just grateful the company hires them at all, so they turn a blind eye. Even though they know what's happening, they stay silent to avoid trouble. The companies are incredibly ruthless. He explained that collusion between businesses and local officials is widespread. Companies have backing and influence in their areas. Even when the government knows that millions of yuan in subsidies are being misappropriated, the companies often escape punishment. Meanwhile, these businesses are praised as welfare companies and enjoy tax breaks, government procurement contracts, and additional subsidies. Mr. Wu also noted that information is highly controlled in China. When workers face unpaid wages, they have few avenues for help. Some gather to protest at their companies or report the issue to local labor authorities, but protests rarely make a difference. Workers have no option but to curse quietly among themselves. Wu said, "The few who speak out are severely punished. Even if someone stands up for the workers, they risk being turned against and accused of disrupting the status quo. Most workers just stay silent to protect their livelihoods, creating a kind of fearful balance." The CCP's approach to wage arrears includes not only evasion and inaction, but also using the judicial system to suppress workers and their lawyers. Corrupt officials fabricate absurd charges to target those who fight for their rightful wages. According to China Digital Times, Li Baozhong, a delegate to the 13th National People's Congress from Hebei and chairman of Hebei Construction Group, coined the term malicious wage demands. During an NPC session, Li proposed that migrant workers who maliciously demand demand their wages should be blacklisted in the national credit system. This blacklist typically includes individuals with unpaid debts, overdue loans, or unpaid credit card bills. Those on the list face property seizures, asset freezes, travel restrictions, and limits on obtaining loans. Ironically, on December 8th, it was reported that Li Baozhong himself was blacklisted for unpaid wages. Public records show that his company faces over 1,000 risks and liabilities. According to Chi-Cha-Cha, a Chinese business information platform, on December 9, 2024, Hebei Construction Group was listed as an enforced person by a local court in Tianjin for failing to pay 204,000 yuan. The total amount of unpaid obligations reached 3.46 million yuan, with 89% remaining unsettled. On December 17th, Chinese writer Lin Yue posted about this, sarcastically commenting, "Turns out Mr. Li is an expert in unpaid wages. He must have suffered so much from wage demands that he's fiercely proposing blacklisting workers who ask for their wages. What poetic justice." As tensions between unpaid workers and employers continue to escalate, wage-related riots have recently erupted in Hunan and Guangxi. Recently, a video shared by X-user Zhao Lanjian showed a wage protest by migrant workers in Zhongshan County, Guangxi. These workers, frustrated by unpaid wages, took to the streets demanding payment. In response, the local government dispatched riot to suppress the protests. However, the workers, armed with iron rods, clashed with the baton-wielding officers. The riot police were overwhelmed and fled, abandoning their shields as they retreated. Some workers picked up the discarded shields and continued pursuing the officers, forcing some police to seek refuge inside their vehicles. Ultimately, the workers succeeded in reclaiming their wages and prepared to celebrate the new year. Zhao Lanjian remarked that under CCP rule, public security bureaus, prosecutors, and courts have lost their effectiveness, leaving people to their own devices and iron rods to demand wages. He mentioned that this outcome was only natural and wished the protesters success in reclaiming their rights from the authorities. Many online commenters expressed support, noting that the workers were merely trying to retrieve the money that rightfully belonged to them. They criticized the local government for failing to provide solutions, leaving the workers no choice but to handle the situation on their own. One commenter summed it up by saying, "When dealing with bandits, violence is the only answer. Kneeling will only get you exploited further." A viral article circulating online echoed this sentiment. The article began by stating, "First, let me clarify. This isn't my opinion. It's from the Central Military Commission. If just one battalion rebels, mainland China will become the next Syria." The piece argued that the entire country now relies on military force to maintain order, with society increasingly fragmented and the public growing resentful. It warned that the entire system is like a tinderbox, waiting for a single spark. The article claimed that Chinese President Xi Jinping no longer dares to appear in public crowds, and whenever he visits a location, residents within a 2-kilometer radius are evacuated. According to the author, sudden upheavals could occur at any moment. The article questioned why deploying a single platoon requires CMC approval, or why even hosting a wedding banquet requires prior registration. He said, "It's because they fear a Syria 2.0 situation unfolding in China. The message is clear. Just one battalion or 10 platoons could trigger a full-scale crisis. This is what Xi Jinping is concerned about." It highlighted the rapid collapse of Syria's government, suggesting China faces similar risks. The article drew parallels, explaining that confiscating public servants' passports reflects fears that they may flee faster than Xi himself. It further claimed that police officers and public servants are also experiencing wage arrears, while restrictions on overseas investments and capital transfers signals national bankruptcy. The increasing difficulty in withdrawing funds from banks, the article argued, indicates a banking crisis. Traffic lockdowns during Xi's visits signify a loss of authority. The article suggested that, much like in Syria, low-paid police and soldiers may not defend the regime when needed. It speculated that the CCP's frequent military exercises around Taiwan are less about preparing for war and more about monitoring potential internal dissent within the military. The real goal, it claimed, is to expose and eliminate potential threats to Xi's rule. The author hypothesized that if an actual conflict erupted, hostile forces would deploy troops near Beijing, potentially rallying tens of thousands of dissidents overnight to overthrow the CCP. Online commentators suggested that it wouldn't take an entire battalion. If the Central Security Regiment turned against the leadership, it could lead to a regime change. Xie Tian, a professor at the University of South Carolina School of Business, supported the article's claims, stating, "This isn't baseless. Xi Jinping has been aggressively purging military leaders, like the complete removal of the rocket force's top officials. Across all branches, he's conducting major cleanups. This undoubtedly breeds resentment and hostility within the military. Additionally, younger, more hardline factions are unhappy with Xi's actions. The anti-Xi sentiment within the military is extremely strong." Secondly, the possibility of a single battalion turning against him is entirely possible. Consider how the Gang of Four was overthrown in the 1980s. The Central Security Regiment defected. Dictatorships all follow the same pattern. If there's defection at the top, it could take just a company, a battalion, or a regiment to resolve the situation overnight. The article sparked further online discussions, with users commenting, "Even the National Security Agency is arresting people for saying the economy is bad. This shows their fear has reached the extreme." Whenever a country's security forces defect, the regime collapses. Just look at Syria. Others reflected on the uncertainty of the future, saying, "Anything is possible. Will tomorrow or the unexpected come first? The last straw that breaks the camel's back may take a lifetime, or it might happen in the next second. Who knows?"